The cabin door sealed with a satisfying hiss as Sarah Mitchell pulled her wheeled carry-on into the narrow galley area of the Boeing 737. It was 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the first passengers would begin boarding Flight 447 from Los Angeles International Airport. The morning light filtered through the small galley window, casting her pale reflection back at her, a woman barely visible even to herself. At 52 years old, Sarah had perfected an art that few people ever truly mastered, the art of complete and utter invisibility. She existed in that peculiar space between presence and absence, where her competence was so seamless that passengers couldn't quite remember her face after they'd deplaned, let alone her name. "Thank you," they'd say to her as they departed, their gratitude sincere but their attention already focused on baggage claim and ground transportation. Some would return on the same airline within weeks and sit in the same rows she'd served, never recognizing the woman who had attended to their needs with quiet efficiency. Her uniform hung perfectly, navy blue with the American Airlines insignia pressed sharp as a knife edge on her left breast. Her short brown hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pinned back with the same black bobby pins she'd worn for the past decade. No loose strands, no rebellious wisps, everything in its place. Her shoes were polished to a mirror shine, her name tag centered precisely 3 fingers below her collar. She was, in every measurable way, the ideal flight attendant. And this fact filled her with a sadness that she'd long ago learned to hide. 18 years. She'd been doing this for 18 years. 18 years of early mornings and jet lag, of standing in aisles as heavy weather buffeted the aircraft, of smiling through migraine headaches and personal heartbreak. 18 years of serving drinks she'd never drink, distributing peanuts she'd never eat, demonstrating oxygen masks, while privately imagining all the things that could go wrong. 18 years of being essential and invisible in equal measure. Sarah began her pre-flight routine with mechanical precision. She checked the galley supplies, coffee, tea, juice, water. She verified that all the emergency equipment was in place and functioning. She reviewed the passenger manifest on the flight attendant tablet, looking at the names and seat assignments as if they contained secrets about the people she'd be serving. Row 12C, Margaret Chen, age 73. Row 14B, David Morales, age 4, and Michael Morales, age 6. Row 3A, James Peterson, age 45, connecting to Denver from a flight originating in New York. She always did this, reading the names, imagining the lives, creating small narratives about the stories unfolding in the cabin she was about to enter. The other flight attendants filed in Marcus, who was 28 and handsome and kind, always trying to include Sarah in conversations she didn't feel equipped to participate in, and Jennifer, who was younger still, with a toddler at home and a husband in the Navy. They were nice people, good people, but Sarah existed on a different frequency than they did. When they laughed together while reviewing the safety procedures, she smiled without laughing. When they complained about difficult passengers, she listened without complaining. She was the crew's conscience, always present, never intrusive, never demanding anything from anyone. "Sarah, can you double-check the first-class catering?" Marcus asked, his tone casual but not unkind. "Already done," she said, even though she hadn't started it yet. She would do it now while they finished their briefing. She always did everything ahead of time, anticipating needs before they were asked for, solving problems before they existed. It was the only way she knew how to belong, by being useful. As she moved through the aircraft performing her checks, she found herself thinking about her father, James Mitchell, the way she did on most mornings lately. He'd been dead for 15 years, but his voice still lived in her head, still guided her decisions, still whispered encouragement in moments of doubt. He'd been an aeronautical engineer for the Air Force, a brilliant man who'd spent his career understanding the physics of flight, the mathematics of thrust and drag, the engineering that kept metal tubes full of people safely suspended in the sky. She was 8 years old when she'd first fallen in love with aviation. Her father had brought home a massive blueprint of an engine, spreading it across the kitchen table while Sarah's mother was at work. He'd spent 3 hours explaining every component to her: the compressor, the turbine, the combustion chamber. "See, Sarah," he'd said, his finger tracing delicate lines. "The whole thing works because every single part does its job perfectly. If one part fails, everything fails. But if they're all working together, it's a miracle. It's beautiful." Sarah had been captivated. For years after that, she'd spent her afternoons in his home office, learning everything he could teach her. She'd studied the blueprints, memorized the specifications, understood the physics at a level that her childhood friends found bizarre. Her father had encouraged every question, every moment of curiosity. "Knowledge is your superpower," he'd tell her. "Never forget that. In a world that doesn't listen to quiet girls, knowledge gives you power." But Sarah had chosen differently. After high school, she decided against engineering school, against the path her father had so clearly laid out for her. Instead, she'd pursued a degree in hospitality management, and then, at her mother's suggestion, had joined the airline. It seemed practical. It seemed safe. It seemed like a way to see the world without being pulled into the intensity of academia and competition. Her mother had died from cancer when Sarah was 31. Her father had followed her 15 years later, a massive stroke that took him in his sleep. And Sarah, at 52, suddenly realized she was entirely alone in a world that had never quite noticed she was there. Now, moving through the pre-flight cabin checks, she occasionally caught her reflection in the polished windows and window frames. That quiet woman in the Navy uniform, with her neat hair and careful smile, was that all she was? Was that all she would ever be? Something felt different today, though. As she checked the seat belts in row 12, as she organized the blankets in the overhead compartment, as she reviewed the safety information for the millionth time, there was an electricity in the air, a sense of something waiting, of potential energy gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. Sarah paused by a window and looked out at the Los Angeles skyline, already warming with morning sun. She pressed her fingertips against the cool glass and whispered, as if her father could hear her, "I'm ready. Whatever comes, I'm ready." She didn't know why she said it. She didn't know what she was ready for. But as she turned away from the window and returned to her duties, something shifted inside her, a quiet certainty that this day would be different from all the others. This day would matter. The boarding process began at 7:15 a.m. exactly as scheduled. Sarah positioned herself at the entrance of the aircraft, greeting each passenger with the same warm but professional smile she'd perfected over 18 years. "Good morning. Welcome aboard. Enjoy your flight." The words came automatically, requiring no conscious thought, leaving her mind free to observe the people filing past. First came the business travelers, men and women in tailored suits, carrying leather briefcases, moving with the practiced efficiency of those who lived their lives in airplane cabins. They barely glanced at her. Next were the families. A young mother with twin toddlers in a double stroller caught Sarah's eye. The woman looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a strand of hair escaping her ponytail. One of the twins was crying softly, a desperate wail of fatigue and confusion. Sarah made a mental note. When the beverage service came around, she'd bring extra blankets to that row without being asked. The children would sleep better with something soft and familiar. An elderly man in a cardigan came aboard clutching a worn photograph to his chest like it was made of gold. He moved slowly, each step deliberate, his free hand gripping the handrail for support. When he passed Sarah, she smiled. A real smile this time, not the automatic one. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I help you find your seat?" "Row 12C, he said, his voice papery with age. "I'm going to meet my grandson. He's turning 7 next week. I haven't seen him in 2 years. Sarah felt something catch in her chest. "That's wonderful. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you." The man paused and looked at her with surprising intensity. "You know, my wife used to say that the best part of flying was the flight attendants. She said they were the invisible angels of the sky." He smiled sadly. "She passed 3 years ago, But she was right. You all are angels. Sarah didn't know what to say, so she simply guided him to his seat and watched him settle into 12C, the photograph still clutched in his weathered hands. As she turned away, she realized she had no idea what his name was. She would never know his name. And yet, in that brief moment, something real had passed between them, a recognition of shared humanity that transcended the professional transaction of air travel. The cabin filled steadily. A young couple on their honeymoon, still holding hands constantly, stealing kisses whenever they thought no one was looking. A businessman who worked on his laptop the moment he sat down, his face already creased with stress. A group of college students heading to a summer hiking expedition, loud and boisterous and full of the kind of joy that made Sarah feel ancient. A woman traveling alone with a worn paperback romance novel and a smile that suggested she was exactly where she wanted to be. Sarah cataloged them all, building her internal map of the human landscape she was about to steward across the sky. By 8:30 a.m., all 216 passengers were aboard. The aircraft was full, one of those rare completely booked flights where every seat was occupied, where the cabin felt alive with potential. Sarah could feel the energy of all those lives intersecting, all those stories converging for the next 5 hours across the country. The doors sealed. Sarah's ears popped slightly with the pressure change. Captain James Richardson's voice came through the intercom, calm and authoritative. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to American Airlines Flight 447 with service to Denver. We're expecting a smooth flight this morning with ideal weather conditions. Flight time will be approximately 4 hours and 20 minutes. Please direct your attention to the safety demonstration." Sarah positioned herself at the center aisle, flanked by Marcus and Jennifer. She performed this demonstration thousands of times, so many times that her body moved through the motions while her mind could wander. But today, she performed it with unusual attention, as if each gesture mattered. She demonstrated the oxygen mask, explaining how to secure it, how to help those around you. She showed the proper brace position, the location of emergency exits, the flotation device under the seat cushion. Her voice was calm and clear, and for the first time in years, she thought about whether any of these people actually heard her warnings or if they were all, like most passengers, already mentally halfway to their destination. The aircraft began to taxi. Sarah moved through the cabin conducting her final walkthrough before departure, checking that all carry-on luggage was properly stowed, that seatbelts were fastened, that tray tables were locked in place. The young mother with the twins had managed to get both children settled, with blankets tucked around them. Sarah paused and quietly added 2 more blankets to the row, along with a lollipop for each child. The mother looked up, tears suddenly glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've been so nervous about this flight alone with both of them." "You're doing great," Sarah said, and meant it. "They're going to sleep soon and you'll have some peace." The aircraft lined up on the runway. Through the small window, Sarah could see the Los Angeles landscape, sprawling, chaotic, beautiful. She strapped herself into the jump seat as the final pre-flight checks were completed. Marcus was already in his seat across the aisle, checking his phone one last time before putting it in airplane mode. Jennifer was reviewing the beverage cart inventory. Everything was routine. Everything was normal. Then the engine spooled up. The power of it was something Sarah felt in her bones, even after all these years. The rumble, the vibration, the sense of enormous forces being unleashed beneath the fuselage. The aircraft surged forward, picking up speed. Her body pressed back slightly against the jump seat as the 737 accelerated. 300,000 pounds of metal and fuel and human hope moving faster and faster down the runway. And then that moment that always made her feel like she was defying physics. The front landing gear left the ground. The aircraft tilted toward the sky. The wings bent slightly under the enormous loads. The engines roared with power. The ground fell away below them, and for a moment, suspended between earth and sky, Sarah felt the miracle of flight in a visceral way that never faded, no matter how many times she experienced it. Flight 447 climbed into the clear morning sky. The seatbelt sign chimed off. Sarah unfastened herself and stood, steadying against the jump seat as the aircraft leveled out. Below them, Los Angeles spread out like a circuit board, the streets forming geometric patterns, the ocean a brilliant blue beyond the sprawl of the city. "All secure," Marcus reported. "Cabin secure," Jennifer confirmed. Sarah moved into the galley and began her beverage service preparations. She filled the coffee brewers with water, set up the beverage cart, arranged cups and napkins with meticulous care. Everything in its place, everything ready. The aircraft continued climbing toward cruising altitude. The morning sun painted the clouds below them in shades of white and gold. Sarah completed her preparations and moved into the cabin to begin the beverage service, moving from row to row with her practiced grace. In row 12C, the elderly man was asleep, the photograph still in his lap. In row 14B, both twins were asleep, wrapped in blankets, their faces peaceful and innocent. Passengers watched movies or read or worked on laptops, each one absorbed in their own private world. Sarah served drinks and snacks. She answered questions about connecting flights and meal options. She moved through the cabin like a ghost, present and helpful, but somehow separate from the human drama unfolding around her. None of them knew that in less than 2 hours everything would change. Sarah was in the middle of serving orange juice to a businessman in 8C when the intercom crackled to life. "Cabin crew to the flight deck, priority." The businessman's eyes widened slightly. He set down his juice carefully, as if sudden movements might destabilize the aircraft. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern flickering across his face. "Everything's fine," Sarah assured him, her voice steady even though her heart had begun beating faster. Priority calls to the flight deck weren't unheard of, but they weren't common either. Usually they came with some small issue, a passenger needing assistance, a technical question from the captain, a request to adjust the cabin temperature. Nothing serious. Nothing that warranted that particular tone. Still, something felt different. Sarah excused herself from the aisle service and made her way toward the cockpit, moving through the first-class cabin where the elderly gentleman in 12C was now awake, staring out the window at the endless blue. He caught her eye briefly, and she offered him a small smile. He returned it, but his expression was troubled. He'd heard the intercom too. The cockpit door was locked, as it always was. Sarah pressed the button, and within seconds, Captain James Richardson opened the door from inside. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that came from decades of flying. She'd flown with him dozens of times over the years, always found him to be professional and calm. But right now, his expression was tightly controlled in a way that suggested something was very wrong. "Come in," he said quietly, glancing back toward the cabin before pulling the door shut behind her. The cockpit was cramped exactly as she remembered, barely room for 3 people, filled with an overwhelming array of instruments and screens. The first officer, Tom Jenkins, a younger man in his early 40s, was focused intently on his instruments, his jaw clenched. Through the windscreen, Sarah could see the vast expanse of sky ahead, the curvature of the earth at this altitude, the sun reflecting off the clouds below them. "Sarah, we have a situation," Captain Richardson said, his voice low and controlled. "I need you to listen carefully and not panic." Those words, "don't panic," were the exact words designed to make people panic. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. 2 F-16 fighter jets took off from Holloman Air Force Base approximately 15 minutes ago, the captain continued. "They're pursuing an unidentified aircraft in this region. That aircraft is currently about 10 miles ahead of our flight path. Air traffic control has been monitoring the situation and coordinating with the military. The situation appears to be under control, but there's a complication." Sarah gripped the edge of the small fold-down seat in the cockpit, her knuckles whitening. "What kind of complication?" "The F-16 pilot has observed what appears to be a critical mechanical issue with the target aircraft," Captain Richardson explained. "Something potentially catastrophic with one of the engines. He's trying to relay this information to the target aircraft's crew, but there's interference with their communications. The pilot needs someone with technical knowledge about aircraft systems to help relay and interpret the information." Sarah's mind reeled. F-16s, a crippled aircraft, technical information. Air traffic control asked if anyone on this aircraft had aviation or engineering experience, the captain continued. He pulled up Sarah's personnel file on his tablet. "I found this in your employment record. You listed aeronautical engineering in your family background, but you never pursued it as a career. Is that correct?" Sarah nodded slowly, unable to find her voice. The cockpit suddenly felt very small, very enclosed. She could hear the constant hum of the engines, the whisper of the environmental systems, the occasional chatter of air traffic control through the radios. Outside, 35,000 feet of nothing separated them from the earth. "Tell me about your experience," the captain said, not unkindly. Sarah took a shaky breath. "My father was an aeronautical engineer. He worked for the Air Force for 42 years. I spent my childhood learning about aircraft systems from him. I studied everything: engines, aerodynamics, materials science, failure analysis. I was going to go to aerospace engineering school, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to explain the whole complicated story of why she'd chosen hospitality management instead. "Do you understand engine diagnostics?" Tom Jenkins asked, turning slightly to look at her. "Yes," Sarah said, and was surprised to find that her voice was steady. "Compressor systems, combustion chambers, turbines, failure modes, thermal signatures, pressure differentials. My father spent hours teaching me the physics of how engines work, and more importantly, how they fail." Captain Richardson and Tom exchanged a look. Some silent communication passed between them. The captain turned back to Sarah. "We need you to help relay technical information from the F-16 pilot to the target aircraft's crew. You'll be connected through air traffic control. You'll need to listen carefully to what the pilot observes, ask clarifying questions if needed, and help interpret the data for the ground teams who will be making critical decisions about that aircraft." Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. "Me? I'm a flight attendant. I'm not a pilot or an engineer." "No," the captain agreed. "But you're the only person at 35,000 feet right now who can do what needs to be done. Air traffic control has already cleared this with the airline. We're not asking you to fly the plane or make decisions. We're asking you to be a translator, to help bridge the gap between what the F-16 pilot is seeing and what the target aircraft's crew needs to understand." The enormity of it hit her then. A real aircraft in real danger, real people whose lives might depend on information she relayed, real stakes, real consequences. Tom Jenkins moved slightly, and Sarah realized he was clearing space for her in the cramped cockpit. She sat down on the fold-down seat, her legs feeling suddenly unstable. Through the window, she could see the horizon, that perfect line where Earth curved into sky, the eternal blue that surrounded them, infinite and indifferent. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Knowledge is your superpower, Sarah. Never forget that. In a world that doesn't listen to quiet girls, knowledge gives you power." She'd spent 18 years hiding that knowledge, ashamed of her own intelligence, content to be invisible. And now, in this moment, 35,000 feet above the New Mexico desert, her knowledge was the only thing standing between a crippled aircraft and disaster. Captain Richardson placed a headset on her head, adjusted the microphone so it sat properly, and checked that the connection was live. Tom was already communicating with air traffic control, confirming the technical support arrangement. "Are you ready?" the captain asked gently. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of her father, of all those afternoons spent learning about engines and systems. She thought of all the knowledge he'd tried to pass on to her, knowledge she'd almost thrown away. She thought of the people on this aircraft, all 216 of them, counting on her without knowing it. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm ready." The captain squeezed her shoulder briefly, a gesture of reassurance and confidence. Through the headset, she could hear the crackle of the radio frequencies, the ambient noise of air traffic control, and then, suddenly, a new voice breaking through, a voice coming from one of the F-16s now flying parallel to their position. Flight 447, the military pilot's voice came through, urgent but controlled. "This is Shadow 1. We have critical technical information that needs to be relayed. Are you standing by with our technical advisor?" Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. This was happening. This was really happening. "Standing by," Captain Richardson confirmed. "Patching you through now." He nodded at Sarah. She took a deep breath, placed her hands on her lap to steady them, and spoke into the microphone for the first time. "Shadow 1, this is American Airlines Flight 447. I'm standing by to receive technical information. Please transmit." There was a brief pause. Then the F-16 pilot's voice came back, and she could hear the relief in it, the relief of someone who just realized they were talking to someone who understood. "Copy that. We have visual on a target aircraft approximately 10 miles ahead of your position. I'm observing what appears to be a critical issue with their number 2 engine. Let me describe what I'm seeing." And in that moment, Sarah Mitchell's invisible life changed forever. The moment Sarah's voice came through the headset, calm, professional, ready, something fundamental shifted inside her. It was as if she'd suddenly stepped out of the life she'd been living for 18 years and into a parallel existence where she actually mattered, where her knowledge wasn't a buried secret but a weapon, a tool, a lifeline. "Shadow 1, she repeated, more to anchor herself than anything else. The words felt foreign in her mouth but also strangely right. She pressed the headset closer to her ear, aware that every word mattered now, every nuance, every piece of information. Captain Richardson was monitoring the entire exchange, watching her with an expression that mixed confidence and concern. Tom Jenkins kept his eyes on the instruments, maintaining Flight 447's position and altitude with the precision that kept an aircraft stable at this height. "Copy that, Flight 447, the F-16 pilot's voice came back. "Stand by for technical data." There was a pause, perhaps 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. She clasped them together to hide the tremor. Through the small cockpit window she could see the sky ahead, endless and vast and impossibly blue. Somewhere in that immensity another aircraft was in trouble. Real people, real lives, real consequences. Her father's voice came back to her, not as an echo this time but as a visceral memory. She was 8 years old again, sitting at his kitchen table, his blueprint spread before her like a map to the universe. "The thing about engines, Sarah," he'd said, his finger tracing the compressor stages, "is that they're a symphony. Each part depends on every other part. The air comes in here and it gets compressed in stages. Each stage increases the pressure and temperature. Then it goes into the combustion chamber where it mixes with fuel and ignites. The explosion drives the turbine, which creates power for the compressor. Everything working together. Beautiful engineering." She'd been captivated. She'd spent years learning how that symphony could be disrupted, how one failure could cascade into catastrophe. "Okay," the F-16 pilot's voice came through. "I'm positioned approximately 10 miles ahead of your flight. Target aircraft is a regional turboprop. I've got a clear visual. What I'm seeing concerns me greatly. Number 2 engine, that's the starboard engine, is showing signs of serious distress." Sarah's mind shifted into focus. Her personal anxiety melted into background noise. This was data. This was a puzzle. This was exactly what her father had trained her for. "Describe the visual indicators," she said, her voice steady. "What are you observing?" "Good question," the pilot said, and she heard relief in his tone. "First, there's a visible shimmer in the engine casing. It's subtle, but I can see it. Second, I'm detecting what appears to be an unusual heat signature. The thermal imaging shows hot spots in the compressor section that shouldn't be there. And third, this is what's really concerning me. There's a slight vibration in the entire engine pod. The mounting brackets seem to be experiencing stress. Sarah's mind worked through the information. Shimmer in the casing, heat signature, vibration. She could visualize it. The engine, metal and fire and physics, something going wrong inside those intricate stages of compression. Compressor stall, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. That's exactly what I think, the F-16 pilot confirmed. But I need someone with real expertise to confirm before we escalate this to the target aircraft crew. They need to understand what's happening without panicking. Captain Richardson was watching her intently. Tom Jenkins glanced back briefly, his expression unreadable but his presence reassuring. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. This was it. This was the moment where her 18 years of hidden knowledge either meant something or meant nothing. This was where all those afternoons with her father either translated into something real or remained just a nostalgic memory of a dead man, and a girl who never became an engineer. She opened her eyes. "Tell me about the compressor stages," she said to the pilot. "Which stages are showing the heat signature, all of them or specific ones?" The F-16 pilot took a moment, and she realized he was probably accessing imagery or information that she couldn't see. "It looks like the later stages, the ones closer to the combustion chamber. The first and second stages look normal." "So the compression is happening normally up to a point," Sarah said, thinking out loud. "But in the later stages, something is disrupting the flow. That would cause a pressure cascade which would generate heat. The shimmer in the casing would be from the metal expanding due to heat stress. And the vibration," she trailed off, visualizing the mechanical reality of it. "Compressor blade failure," she continued, "or partial blade failure. Something is wrong with one or more of the compressor blades in the later stages. When the blade gets damaged, the airflow becomes turbulent instead of smooth. The pressure builds up instead of moving through efficiently. That's a stall condition." Through the headset she heard the F-16 pilot exhale. "Okay, yes, that makes sense with what I'm seeing. So what does that mean for the aircraft? How dangerous is this?" Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. This was the moment where her knowledge and the reality of flying intersected. She thought of her father's warnings about cascade failures, about how one component's failure could compromise everything downstream. "It means," she said carefully, "that the engine is unstable. It's producing power, but the compressor is fighting against itself. The engine will be vibrating significantly. The pilot and crew will definitely feel it. They need to understand that this engine is not trustworthy. They can continue flying on one engine because modern aircraft are designed for that. But this engine could fail completely at any moment." "What would that look like?" the pilot asked. "Catastrophic failure," Sarah said plainly. "The entire engine could seize. The turbine could overload and fail. There could be structural damage to the engine mount. In the worst-case scenario, if they're in a climb or banking hard and the engine suddenly loses all power while stressed, the torque imbalance could cause a spin." She realized how clinical she sounded, how matter-of-fact discussing potential disaster. But this was what her father had taught her, to understand the physics, to respect the danger, to communicate it clearly. "They need to divert," she continued. "They need to land as soon as possible at a suitable airport where they can safely handle a potential engine emergency. They can land safely on one engine, but they need to do it now, before this compressor completely fails." Captain Richardson was nodding, his expression grave but confident. "All right," the F-16 pilot said. "That's exactly the assessment I needed. You know your stuff. I'm going to relay this information to the target aircraft crew immediately, but I might need you to clarify some technical points with them. Are you available to stay on this channel?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I'll stay on the channel for as long as you need me." "Thank you," the pilot said, and there was genuine gratitude in his voice. "You just potentially saved that entire crew's life by knowing how to interpret what I was seeing. Stand by." Sarah sat in the cramped cockpit, headset on, her hands clasped together, aware that she just stepped across a threshold from which there was no returning. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was someone's lifeline, someone's expert, someone who mattered. Captain Richardson placed his hand on her shoulder. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "Your father would be proud." And in that moment, Sarah understood something she'd been running from for decades. Her father's knowledge had never been meant to be buried. It had been meant for moments exactly like this. It had been waiting inside her, dormant, for the moment when knowledge truly mattered. The moment was now. Through the headset, she heard the F-16 pilot initiating contact with the target aircraft crew, preparing to relay information that would change their flight path, their plans, their entire day. And she was the reason they would understand it correctly. She was the bridge between the military's observations and the crew's survival. Sarah Mitchell, the woman no one had noticed, was suddenly the most important person in the sky. The next 14 minutes would be the most intense of Sarah's life. Every second felt elongated, every word weighted with consequence. The F-16 pilot, Shadow 1, as he identified himself, began his transmission to the target aircraft crew, and Sarah listened intently to every syllable, ready to clarify, ready to interpret, ready to help bridge the gap between what a military pilot was seeing through advanced optics and what a civilian crew needed to understand. "Target aircraft, this is Shadow 1, the pilot's voice came through. "We have military support on station. We've observed what appears to be mechanical distress on your starboard engine. We have a technical advisor standing by to help you understand what you're experiencing. How do you read?" There was a pause and then a new voice, the captain of the target aircraft. Sarah noted immediately that he sounded younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 40s. His voice was steady but carried an undertone of stress. "Shadow 1, we read you 5 by 5. We've been noticing vibration in the starboard engine for the last few minutes. Our instruments show elevated temperatures in that engine section. We didn't want to overreact, but your presence suggests this is serious. Please advise." Captain Richardson leaned toward Sarah and whispered, "They're scared. Help them understand." Sarah nodded. She understood. Fear was the enemy in a situation like this. Fear made people make bad decisions. Fear clouded judgment. What they needed was clarity. "Shadow 1, Sarah said into her headset, her voice calm and authoritative in a way she'd never heard herself speak before. "Relay to the target aircraft that we're going to work through this systematically. Ask them to confirm their current engine parameters." The F-16 pilot relayed her question. The target aircraft captain responded immediately, reading off engine temperatures, pressures, RPM percentages. Sarah listened carefully, comparing what he was telling her to what the F-16 pilot had observed. The numbers didn't lie. The starboard engine was operating outside nominal parameters. "Ask him if he's experienced any abnormal vibration frequency, or if the vibration is constant," Sarah instructed. The question went through the relay. The target captain came back. "Vibration is intermittent, happens mostly at higher power settings. When we back off on the throttle, it reduces significantly." Sarah's mind was working at lightning speed. Intermittent vibration at high power settings suggested something specific. "That's compressor blade flutter or partial blade damage," she said to Captain Richardson. "When they increase power, the airflow through the damaged blade section destabilizes. When they reduce power, the airflow isn't fast enough to reach the flutter threshold." "Tell Shadow 1, she continued, speaking back into her headset. "We need thermal imaging on the compressor stages specifically. Ask him to focus on the outer casing temperature variations between the compressor section and the turbine section." The F-16 pilot responded. "Already got that visual. The compressor stages show localized hot spots. I'm seeing what looks like damage to one of the high-stage blades. It's subtle, but there's definitely deformation there. Captain Richardson was making notes on a pad, documenting everything. Tom Jenkins was monitoring their altitude and position, making small adjustments to keep Flight 447 stable while this drama unfolded miles ahead of them. "Shadow 1, Sarah said, her professional training and her father's knowledge merging into something powerful. Ask the target aircraft captain to confirm their current altitude and ask what diversion airports are available within their glide range." The question was relayed. There was a brief pause before the target captain responded. "We're at flight level 310. Current heading puts Denver, Albuquerque, and El Paso within glide range if we lose the starboard engine." Sarah's pulse quickened. Good, options. The target aircraft wasn't trapped. They had choices, they had airports, they had time. "Albuquerque," she said decisively. "They should divert to Albuquerque. It's the closest with the best emergency services infrastructure. They need to declare an emergency and begin descent immediately." The F-16 pilot relayed the recommendation. The target captain acknowledged. "Copy. We're declaring emergency with ATC now, beginning descent to Albuquerque. What are we looking at in terms of how much time we have?" This was the critical question. This was where Sarah had to be honest about the danger without inducing panic. "Shadow 1, she said carefully. "Ask him to understand that the compressor blade damage means the engine's structural integrity is compromised. The damage will likely progress as they continue flying on that engine. The vibration could increase. The damage could cascade. He has maybe 30 to 40 minutes of safe flight time on that engine before risk escalates significantly." She paused, then added, "But they can land safely on one engine if they descend gradually and manage their power carefully. The key is to reduce demand on the starboard engine immediately and maintain steady descent toward Albuquerque." The information was relayed. The target captain came back with a different tone now, no longer scared but focused, professional, understanding the situation. "Copy all. We're reducing power on the starboard engine to idle, beginning descent. Current ETA Albuquerque is approximately 38 minutes at this descent rate." Sarah felt her shoulders drop slightly. It was going to be okay, not perfectly okay, but survivable. The target aircraft had time. The pilots understood the situation. The mechanics of the problem were clear. But then Shadow 1's voice came back, and there was an edge to it she hadn't heard before. "Flight 447, we're getting new data from the aircraft's onboard systems," the pilot said. "Their engine pressure indicators are showing a rapid drop in compressor discharge pressure. That's consistent with catastrophic blade failure." Sarah's eyes widened. Rapid drop, catastrophic. The situation was deteriorating faster than anticipated. "How rapid?" she asked sharply. "We're seeing a rate of change that suggests more than one blade might be failing," the F-16 pilot responded. "This could cascade, could become a complete engine seizure." Captain Richardson was already on the radio to air traffic control. "ATC, Flight 447 advises target aircraft is experiencing progressive engine failure. They need priority vectoring to Albuquerque. Emergency status confirmed." Sarah's mind raced. Progressive failure. That meant the situation was becoming unstable exponentially, not linearly. The compressor blades were failing one after another, each failure creating stress on the remaining blades, each stress creating more failures. "Shadow 1, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Tell the target aircraft they need to begin immediate descent. Not gradual descent. Immediate descent. I know that will put stress on the damaged engine, but the stress of continued altitude will make the blade failure cascade faster. Descent will reduce the pressure differential and slow the cascade." The pilot relayed the instruction. The target captain didn't hesitate. Copy. Beginning immediate descent. Starting steep rate of descent now. Through the headset, Sarah could hear the subtle changes in engine sound as the target aircraft altered its trajectory. She could hear the note of strain, the urgency. Their descent rate is 600 feet per minute, the F-16 pilot reported. Steeper than normal but safe. Tom Jenkins glanced back at Sarah. His expression was unreadable, but she sensed his respect. She was handling this like someone who'd been trained for it, not like a flight attendant improvising beyond her experience. Current distance to Albuquerque, Sarah asked. Approximately 90 miles, the target captain came back. Descent time at current rate approximately 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Sarah could see it in her mind. The aircraft dropping toward the earth, the engines pushing the aircraft toward safety, the target captain and crew fighting to keep the damaged machine in the air just long enough to reach solid ground. They can make it, Sarah said quietly, as much to herself as to anyone else. If the engine holds, the F-16 pilot said grimly. And in that moment, Sarah understood the true weight of what they were doing. They could give advice, they could provide information, they could help with decisions. But ultimately, the outcome depended on physics and luck, on whether one set of metal compressor blades could hold together long enough for the aircraft to descend to the safety of an airport. Everything now was in the hands of people fighting against the inevitable failure of a machine at 30,000 feet. Everything now was about the race between descent and disaster. The cockpit of Flight 447 felt impossibly small. Sarah sat wedged into the fold-down seat with her headset on, her hands clasped so tightly that her fingernails were pressing crescents into her palms. Captain Richardson stood motionless, watching her with an intensity that suggested he understood the magnitude of what was happening. Tom Jenkins maintained their course, his professionalism unwavering even as the drama unfolded around them. Through her headset, Sarah could hear multiple conversations happening simultaneously on different radio frequencies. The F-16 pilot coordinating with air traffic control, the target aircraft captain communicating their descent progress, ground controllers at Albuquerque preparing for emergency landing procedures. It was a symphony of urgency, each voice a thread in a complex pattern designed to keep one crippled aircraft in the sky long enough to reach safety. Shadow 1, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the radio noise with surgical precision. I need the target aircraft to confirm their current altitude and descent rate. The question was relayed. The response came back quickly. Flight level 290, descent rate holding at 600 feet per minute. Starboard engine vibration is increasing. We're experiencing oscillations now, not just steady vibration. Oscillations. That was bad. Oscillations meant the blade damage was creating feedback loops, creating instability that fed on itself. Sarah's mind visualized the machinery, metal blades spinning at thousands of RPM, damaged blades catching air in an irregular pattern, each revolution creating stress on the remaining intact blades. How long until they reach landing altitude? Sarah asked the F-16 pilot. Approximately 12 minutes at current descent rate, Shadow 1 reported. 12 minutes. Sarah calculated it in her head. 12 minutes for metal to hold together under increasingly desperate stress. 12 minutes for physics and engineering and pure hope to cooperate. Shadow 1, she said, I need you to relay to the target aircraft that what they're experiencing, the oscillation, is concerning but expected. The damaged blades are creating a resonance pattern. The key is that they maintain this descent rate and don't reduce it. Reduced descent rate means longer time at high altitude, which means more stress on the engine. They need to stay committed to the descent profile. Captain Richardson was nodding as she spoke. Tom Jenkins had turned slightly, listening to her voice, tracking her expertise with professional respect. The F-16 pilot relayed the message. The target captain's response came back with a note of grim determination. Copy. Maintaining descent rate. Acknowledging oscillation is expected. Crew is focused. We're going to make this. Something in those words, we're going to make this, reverberated through Sarah. This man, this captain she'd never met, was taking her information and using it as the foundation for hope. He was choosing to believe they could survive because she'd told him they could. The responsibility of that hit her like a physical force. Shadow 1, Sarah said quietly. How long until they're at landing altitude? 8 minutes now. They're making good progress. The descent rate is perfect. The aircraft is responding well. 8 minutes. 8 minutes between safety and catastrophe. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. She could see it all in her mind. The aircraft descending through the New Mexico sky, the damaged engine fighting against the laws of physics, the crew in the cockpit focused on every instrument, every indicator, every piece of data telling them how close they were to disaster. She thought of her father. She thought of all those afternoons he'd spent teaching her about engines, about how the elegant machinery of flight was ultimately a negotiation between engineering and physics, between human skill and natural law. Shadow 1, she said, opening her eyes, I need you to ask the target aircraft one more time. Confirm the color of the thermal signature. Is it still bright white or has it darkened? The question seemed oddly specific, but Sarah knew what she was looking for. The color of thermal radiation told a story about temperature. A bright white signature meant extreme heat. A darkened signature might mean the heat was being distributed, cooling spreading, the crisis not escalating further. The F-16 pilot asked the question, and there was a long pause. Sarah could almost feel the pilot on the other end of the line looking through his thermal imaging, studying the engine casing, reading the data from space-age optics. Signature is holding steady, Shadow 1 reported. Still bright white, but it's not intensifying. Current temperature is holding at critical but stable levels. Stable, not intensifying. Sarah felt something unclenching in her chest. That's good, she said, and she infused those two words with all the confidence she possessed. That means the damage is stable. The cascade failure isn't accelerating. The aircraft is handling this as well as we could hope. Captain Richardson placed a hand on her shoulder. She could feel him squeezing gently, a gesture of reassurance and acknowledgement. 5 minutes until landing altitude, Shadow 1 reported. The cockpit of Flight 447 seemed to hold its breath. Sarah could hear the ambient noise of the systems, the gentle whisper of environmental controls, the constant hum of the engines carrying them across the sky. Outside the windscreen, the afternoon sun painted the clouds below them in shades of orange and gold. Shadow 1, Sarah said, relay to the target aircraft. You've done everything right. Your crew has performed perfectly. The aircraft is performing better than expected. You're going to make this landing. You're going to put this bird on the ground safely. And everyone on your aircraft is going to survive this because you understood the situation and executed the response correctly. She paused, then added, and tell them that I'm proud of them. Tell them that what they're doing, maintaining discipline under extreme pressure, trusting the information they've received, executing perfectly, that's what separates professionals from everyone else. The F-16 pilot relayed her words, and then came the target captain's response, and his voice had changed. The stress was still there, but underneath it was something else. Determination, confidence, trust. Flight 447 Technical Advisor, we copy. We're committed. We understand the situation. Albuquerque is in sight now. 3 minutes to landing altitude. 3 minutes. 3 minutes until metal touched Earth. 3 minutes until crisis became history. Sarah found herself holding her breath. She released it slowly, trying to steady her racing heart. 2 minutes to landing altitude, Shadow 1 reported, his voice tight with the weight of the moment. The target captain's voice came back, steady and clear. Albuquerque Tower, target aircraft requesting vectors for emergency landing approach, starboard engine mechanical emergency, single engine approach. Albuquerque Tower responded with professional urgency, clearing other traffic, preparing emergency vehicles, creating a path through the sky for one damaged aircraft to come home. 1 minute to landing altitude, the F-16 pilot reported. Sarah couldn't speak. She could only listen as the seconds ticked down, as physics and engineering and human skill raced against time itself. And then, landing altitude achieved, Shadow 1 said. Target aircraft is stabilized on approach, landing gear down, flaps deployed, there on the glide slope. Sarah's eyes went wet. She didn't cry, she was too controlled for tears, but her eyes burned with the relief of it. They were going to make it. Against impossible odds, they were going to make it. 30 seconds to touchdown, the F-16 pilot said. Sarah could hear it in her headset now. The target captain communicating with Albuquerque Tower. The calm professionalism of trained pilots executing a perfect emergency landing. 10 seconds, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then, touchdown, the target captain's voice came through, not just professional now, but with unmistakable relief. We're down safe. All passengers accounted for. Emergency services standing by. Sarah felt something break inside her, not painfully, but in the way a dam breaks when the pressure becomes too much to contain. 13 minutes. 13 minutes of holding it together while lives hung in the balance. 13 minutes of translating knowledge into survival. The F-16 pilot's voice came through, and it was filled with emotion he couldn't quite hide. Target aircraft, Shadow 1 confirms visual of your safe landing. Congratulations. You did it. You did it perfectly. And then Shadow 1's voice came to Sarah directly. Flight 447 technical advisor, you did this. You know that, right? You saved that entire aircraft. You understood what we were seeing. You helped them understand. You gave them the information they needed to survive. You did this. Sarah couldn't respond. She was shaking, trembling with the release of adrenaline and tension and the overwhelming realization that she had just helped prevent a catastrophe. Captain Richardson squeezed her shoulder harder. Your father would be so proud of you, he said quietly. And finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know. Captain Richardson unfastened the headset from Sarah's head with gentle hands. She could still hear the radio chatter, the final confirmations from Albuquerque that the target aircraft had been cleared for parking, that emergency personnel had checked the aircraft and passengers, that everyone was safe. All 223 people aboard that regional turboprop were alive because of the information she'd provided. 223 lives. The captain was saying something to her, but the words seemed to come from very far away. Tom Jenkins was looking at her with an expression of pure respect. The cockpit suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls too close, the air too thin despite the pressurized cabin maintaining perfect conditions. Sarah, Captain Richardson was saying, Sarah, can you hear me? She nodded. She found her voice somewhere deep inside herself. I'm okay. I need to go back to the cabin. Take a moment, the captain said gently. There's no rush. We're cruising steady. Everything is stable. But Sarah wasn't thinking about Flight 447 anymore. She was thinking about the 216 passengers in the cabin, the elderly man with the photograph, the twins and their exhausted mother, the honeymoon couple, the college students, all of them completely unaware that they'd been flying in a protective cocoon created by military jets and a flight attendant's inherited knowledge. She stood on shaky legs and moved toward the cockpit door. Captain Richardson opened it for her, and she stepped back into the main cabin of Flight 447. The passengers were exactly as she'd left them, reading, sleeping, watching movies, working on laptops. The world had almost ended for 223 people just miles ahead of them, and these 216 continued their afternoon as if nothing had happened, as if the universe hadn't balanced on the edge of catastrophe. Marcus was in the forward galley, restocking the beverage cart. Jennifer was in the rear, checking on passengers. They both glanced at Sarah with curiosity. She'd been gone for over 15 minutes, which was unusual during cruise. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked casually. Sarah opened her mouth. The truth sat on her tongue, enormous and world-altering. She could tell them right now. She could explain everything. But some instinct told her to wait. Some understanding that this moment, this knowledge, this private heroism wasn't yet ready to be shared. "Captain asked me to help with something technical," she said quietly. "It's resolved now." The answer was true without being complete. Marcus accepted it with a nod and returned to his work. Sarah continued through the cabin, completing the service as if her life hadn't fundamentally changed in the past hour. She poured beverages. She delivered snacks. She answered questions about connecting flights and meal options. She was, once again, the invisible flight attendant, moving through the cabin like a ghost. But something was different now. She was hyper-aware of everything. She noticed the elderly man in 12C had woken up, was looking at the photograph again. She noticed the mother with the twins was finally getting some peace and quiet, the children sleeping soundly under the blankets she'd provided. She noticed the honeymoon couple holding hands and looking out the window together, completely unaware of how close they'd come to never arriving at their destination. The knowledge of what she'd done, what she'd prevented, sat inside her like a secret weight. Her phone was in her crew bag in the galley. Against regulations, she retrieved it during a quiet moment and turned it on. There was no cellular service at this altitude, but she needed it for the later part of the flight. As soon as the airplane descended and the signals reached the ground, she would see what happened. The flight continued uneventfully. Sarah served the afternoon snack service. She delivered water and checked on passengers. She moved through the familiar choreography of her job with new eyes, aware now that none of it was really invisible. Every interaction mattered. Every small kindness had weight. At 2:47 p.m., as Flight 447 began its descent into Denver airspace, Sarah's phone buzzed to life. Text messages flooded in, missed calls, and an email from Captain Richardson that had been sent while they were still in the air, presumably from when he'd landed in Denver before Flight 447. "Sarah, the story is already spreading. The military contacted the airline. Media is going to know. You did something extraordinary today. When we land, there will be questions. I wanted to warn you. You were brilliant. You were perfect. Your father would be so proud." Her hands trembled as she read the words. Media. Questions. Everything she'd spent 18 years avoiding, attention, visibility, being noticed, was about to crash into her life like a meteor. The descent continued. Through the cabin window, Sarah could see the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance, the landscape becoming clearer as they descended. Denver spread out below them, growing larger, more defined. At 3:15 p.m., Flight 447 touched down at Denver International Airport. The landing was smooth, professional, perfect. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Captain Richardson's voice came through the intercom. "On behalf of the entire crew, welcome to Denver. Thank you for flying with us today." The passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to deplane. The elderly man stood up carefully, still holding his photograph. The mother with the twins began the careful process of rousing her sleeping children. The college students were already on their feet, eager to begin their adventure. The honeymoon couple held hands as they waited in the aisle. None of them knew. None of them had any idea. As the airplane pulled into the gate and the door opened, Captain Richardson emerged from the cockpit. He caught Sarah's eye and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. Tom Jenkins followed, and both pilots positioned themselves near the cabin exit. an unusual move that made Sarah's pulse quicken. The first passengers began deplaning, moving toward the jet bridge, and then Sarah heard the commotion. Security personnel, airport officials, military liaison officers, something was happening at the gate. Captain Richardson approached Sarah. "You should go meet them. They're going to want to talk to you." "I just want to go home," Sarah said quietly. "I know," the captain replied, "but you did something that matters, Sarah, and you deserve to have that acknowledged." The cabin was emptying now. The elderly man paused as he passed Sarah, the photograph still in his hand. He didn't know what she'd done, couldn't possibly know. But he smiled at her, a genuine smile of gratitude. "Thank you for taking care of us," he said. "My grandson is turning 7 tomorrow. I'm going to see him now because of people like you." Sarah felt her eyes burn with unshed tears. She moved toward the jet bridge, toward the waiting officials, toward the moment when her invisibility would end forever. Behind her, Flight 447 was being cleaned. The blankets would be returned to the closet. The galleys would be restocked. The aircraft would be prepared for its next flight, for its next 216 passengers who would have no idea that this aircraft had played a role in saving lives. But Sarah would remember. She would carry this day with her for the rest of her life. The moment when she was finally seen. The moment when her father's legacy found its purpose. The moment when she became more than invisible. As she stepped into the jet bridge, she pulled out her phone one more time and sent a message to the empty space where her father had once been. "I'm ready now. I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. I understand who I'm supposed to be." And then she walked toward the waiting world, toward the cameras and questions and recognition she'd spent her entire life avoiding. She walked toward her life beginning again. The next 48 hours felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Sarah watched from a distance as everything accelerated beyond her control. Captain Richardson's official report detailed her contributions with precision and respect. The F-16 pilots gave interviews praising her technical expertise. The target aircraft's captain held a press conference at Albuquerque International Airport, sitting beside his crew, all of them crediting the guidance they received from a flight attendant at 35,000 feet. "Her knowledge saved our lives," the target captain said to the assembled reporters. "Without her, we wouldn't have understood what was happening to our aircraft. Without her, we would have made different decisions that could have ended very differently." The story exploded across aviation blogs and then mainstream media. Sarah Mitchell, the invisible woman who became a hero, flight attendant with an aeronautical engineer father, decades of hidden knowledge, a moment of crisis that demanded exactly what she'd spent her entire life learning but never sharing. Her phone didn't stop ringing. The airline wanted her for press releases. Aviation magazines requested interviews. The Air Force asked her to visit Holloman Air Force Base. Universities invited her to speak. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell her story. Sarah sat in her small apartment in Pasadena, surrounded by her possessions that suddenly felt like artifacts from a different era. The photographs of her father, the old blueprints he'd left her, the textbooks she'd kept from her childhood, annotated with notes in her young handwriting. For 18 years, these had been private, personal, sacred. Now they were being requested by researchers and journalists who wanted to document her remarkable life. She'd always imagined that being seen would feel like a violation of her privacy. Instead, she found it oddly liberating. 3 weeks after the incident, Sarah received an invitation that changed everything. The James Mitchell Foundation for Aeronautical Excellence, named for her father, wanted to meet with her about establishing a scholarship program. The foundation had been created decades earlier to support students pursuing careers in aviation and engineering. They'd heard about Sarah's story and wanted her to be involved in their next initiative. "We want to establish the Sarah Mitchell Award for Technical Excellence," the foundation director explained over the phone. "We're thinking 5 scholarships a year, full-ride awards for students who demonstrate both technical proficiency and commitment to service, students who understand that their knowledge exists to help others. Sarah had wept when she heard those words. 5 students, every year because of her, because of what she'd done, because of what her father had taught her. She'd visited the foundation's offices in Los Angeles and spent 3 hours reviewing applications from students across the country. Young women and men pursuing engineering, aviation, physics, mathematics. Students who dreamed of understanding how things worked, how machines could safely transport humans through the sky. There was a young woman named Michelle, only 22 years old, already working on her master's degree in aeronautical engineering. Her essay made Sarah cry. "I became interested in aviation when I lost my father. He was a cargo pilot, and he died in an aircraft accident caused by mechanical failure that could have been prevented if someone had recognized the warning signs. I want to be someone who recognizes warning signs. I want to be someone who prevents tragedies." Sarah personally approved Michelle's application for the first Sarah Mitchell Award. By October, 6 months after the incident, Sarah had been featured in major publications. Time magazine included her in their 100 Most Influential People issue. Aviation Week called her the engineer who chose hospitality and found her calling in crisis. She was invited to speak at the International Civil Aviation Organization conference. She appeared on national news programs. But the moment that meant most to her came in November, when American Airlines asked her to lead a new training program for flight attendants. The Sarah Mitchell Technical Awareness Initiative, they called it. A program designed to educate flight crew about aircraft systems at a deeper level, not pilot-level knowledge, but enough to recognize problems, understand emergency situations, and think clearly under pressure. "We realized we'd been training flight attendants to serve beverages and demonstrate safety procedures," the training director explained. "But we hadn't been teaching them that they might be the bridge between crisis and survival. Your father's approach was different. He understood that knowledge is power." Sarah designed the curriculum herself. She spent months developing modules about engine systems, structural stress, aerodynamic principles, and emergency procedures. She taught using her father's philosophy, explaining the why behind everything, not just the how. She showed flight attendants that their role wasn't just service, it was safety. That knowledge of systems could make them invaluable in unexpected situations. The first class had 300 flight attendants from American Airlines. By the end of the training, many were in tears. They'd suddenly understood their own potential. They'd realized that education, that learning, that understanding how things worked, could transform them from service workers into technical professionals. On her last day of the initial training program, a young flight attendant named David approached her. He was in his late 20s, quiet, the kind of person who probably went unnoticed in a cabin. "Thank you," he said simply. "I never thought about my job this way before. I never realized I could matter this much." Sarah recognized herself in him. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You've always mattered," she told him. "You just didn't know it yet." A year after the incident, Sarah retired from active flight duties. She was 53 years old. She'd been flying for 18 years. She could have continued, but she felt called to something bigger. She became the director of the Sarah Mitchell Foundation's new scholarship program. She wrote a book, not a memoir but a practical guide. Knowledge as Power: How to Think Critically About Complex Systems. It became required reading in engineering schools across the country. She moved back to Denver to be closer to the aerospace companies headquartered there. She established her home office in the same city where Flight 447 had landed on that August afternoon. She mentored young engineers and flight professionals. She spoke at conferences about the importance of interdisciplinary knowledge, about how understanding systems deeply could prevent disasters. 5 years after the incident, Sarah was invited back to Holloman Air Force Base. They wanted to dedicate a facility in her honor, the Sarah Mitchell Technical Operations Center, where F-16 pilots received training in advanced diagnostics and communication protocols, lessons learned from that afternoon in August. She stood in the new facility, surrounded by pilots and engineers and military personnel, and thought about her father. She thought about the kitchen table and the blueprints. She thought about his patient voice explaining how everything connected to everything else. "My father believed," she said during the dedication ceremony, "that knowledge existed to serve people. He believed that understanding how things work wasn't arrogant or excessive. It was responsible. It was a form of power that should be used to prevent suffering and save lives. For a long time, I misunderstood what he was trying to teach me. I thought his knowledge was too much, too intense, too exclusive. But he was right. Knowledge is power, and power exists to serve." At 65 years old, Sarah retired completely from public work. She'd established 5 scholarship programs. She'd trained thousands of flight crew members. She'd mentored hundreds of young engineers. She'd written 3 books that had become industry standards. She'd been invited to speak at every major aviation conference in the world. But perhaps her greatest legacy was something simpler. She'd shown quiet women that their intelligence mattered. That being unnoticed didn't mean being worthless. That hidden knowledge, brought to light at the right moment, could change everything. She kept her father's blueprints framed on her office wall. Above them, she hung a simple plaque. "Knowledge is your superpower. Never forget that. In a world that doesn't listen to quiet girls, knowledge gives you power." James Mitchell, aeronautical engineer, 1942–2004. Sarah Mitchell had spent 18 years being invisible. She'd spent the rest of her life proving that the invisible could become indispensable. That quiet women could be heroes. That inherited knowledge could transform not just one moment, but an entire industry, an entire culture, an entire understanding of what it meant to be prepared. She never sought fame or recognition. She sought understanding, and in seeking understanding, she became unforgettable. Her father would have been so proud.